Hello and welcome to Question Time. I'm Benga Ashiru. A few days ago, Nigeria's 2018 budget was finally passed into law, 6 months into the year and quite a low watermark for the federal government's campaign to return the budget cycle back to the January to December model. The signing of the 2018 appropriation bill into law didn't go down without a high-level drama, as the president did not hide his displeasure about the conduct of the legislature. He accused the National Assembly of gross insertions into the budget. Nigeria now have a legally binding document to guide its expenditure and revenue for 2018. Now, but there are big questions. How do we explain an unprecedentedly high budget of 9.12 trillion naira with a debt profile of $74 billion and yet another 1.6 trillion naira loan to be invested on key infrastructure? Now, the big question, is Nigeria on a borrowing spree or on an investment spree? Now, we had to hear from the horse's mouth. We had a chat with Nigeria's Finance Minister, Kemi Adeosun. She says Nigeria can't afford to fold her arms in the face of a globally competitive economy, and the federal government is determined to catch up. Join us in this interview.
I mean, I think from the executive perspective, by the president laying the budget as far back as November, we made it very clear that our preference was to return to a 12-month cycle like most economies, January to December cycle, and we were hopeful that that was what would happen. It's out now, as you've said. It is 6 months later than we would have liked. What's the impact on the economy? I think the way I'd like to answer that question is that most of the projects from a capital perspective are long-term projects. So we just kept running with the previous budget, and hopefully the plan was it will seamlessly morph into the new budget. Will there be an impact? I think there will be, in terms of the assumptions we made in November are different to today. We plan to borrow some money. Markets have changed, so there may be some impact there in terms of cost. But what we will try and do from the Ministry of Finance perspective is to try and manage the situation the best we can and ensure that we continue with the growth trajectory that the budget, because it is a stimulus budget still.
But we understand that that was not the original budget signed, submitted to the National Assembly. We had reports of budget padding. Has that any impact on the economy also, or your plans for the economy?
From my perspective, from a fiscal perspective, from a treasury perspective, my job is to see how I can fund that budget, how I can ensure that there is adequate revenue to fund the budget, or if we have to borrow, that those borrowings are at the lowest possible cost, and that the projects really, because that's what's interesting to the people, the projects that we aim as an administration to complete are completed.
Yeah, looking at the budget breakdown now, we have the president signed a budget of 9.12 trillion naira, the highest so far in Nigeria's history. We have a capital expenditure that is 2.87 trillion naira, and a recurrent expenditure which is 3.51 trillion naira. When you look at that, that's a kind of budget deficit. Do you think this goes in line with our current situation in terms of stimulating economic growth? Absolutely.
I mean, when we came in, we inherited a situation where capital was, how do I put it, had been relegated to whatever was left over. So we came in with a situation where capital was getting averagely about 10% of what was being spent. And we recognized that in order for this economy to grow, we needed to improve our infrastructure, we need to improve our capital expenditure. So one of the first things we did was increase the overall budget size and allocate a minimum of 30% to capital, because that was what was needed. And we inherited, and just by contrast, situation where for the whole federation, we only were able to spend 19 billion on roads in 2015. When you see the condition of our roads, you realize that that was completely inadequate, and that was holding back economic growth. So one of the objectives of this administration in terms of the economy was improve and increase that capital spending. So the capital spending allocation at 30% is absolutely is absolutely in line with our needs.
Some experts would say that a good budget should have a minimum of 60% devoted to capital expenditure.
Well, I'll be interested to see which economy is doing 60% capex. The really fast-growing economies that have been able to do this have, and where you've seen those kind of numbers, have had massive borrowing. Nigerians are very sensitive about borrowing. It's a very sensitive national issue, so we have to grow in line with our execution capacity. Take China. China has massively sorted out its infrastructure in a generation, 20 years, sorted everything out. But they have a debt to GDP of 250% because they were confident that when they were borrowing that money, they were going to deliver on the road, the rail, the infrastructure. We don't necessarily at this point in time have that capacity, that execution capacity. So it would be very foolhardy of us to just expand the budget and say, oh look, we're going to do massive 60% of capital projects, because it would mean additional borrowing, and then you'd have additional leakages. So what we need to do is to grow gradually. Moving from 10% capital to 30 is a 300% increase in the capital allocation. We need to improve our capacity to deliver on those projects, and as we do so, as we grow into it, we might be able to increase it from 30, but 30 right now is a really comfortable allocation to capital.